You're barred. That's what the government has been told anyway, by publicans across the country for the last 2 months, ever since a campaign that banned Labour MPs from pubs was started to try and strong arm the government into relenting on proposed changes to business rates for hospitality venues. From next April, the rate for an average hotel will increase by around about 115%, and for the average pub by around about 76%. That's an extremely steep rise due to the re-evaluation of what is known as the rateable value of a property, the metric used for calculating business rates. The rateable value is an estimation by the government's valuation office agency on what rental value the property would command if it were empty, and they're reassessed every few years or so. The next time it's going to be reassessed, takes effect on April the 1st. This is combined with a winding down of a pandemic-era 40% hospitality tax relief that was planned to be sunlit by the Tories last year, but was extended in Chancellor Rachel Reeves' first budget until April this year, happening to coincide with these new valuations. Now, I hate to be the Rachel Reeves defence league all of a sudden, but I think that's worth a couple of pointing out here. Sorry, I think it's worth pointing out a couple of things here. It is hardly her fault that the independent body that decides business rates are valuing these properties differently, and the rental values of these premises have increased due to factors largely outside of her control, especially as it's mostly the Tories who are in government since rateable values were last assessed. And on top of this, the government has actually put into place new multipliers for business rates, so that small businesses pay a smaller rate than large warehouses like Amazon, for example, which is getting undermined by the fact that these changes all happen to coincide with the new valuation date. Luckily for pubs, though, the government has at least offered them somewhat of a lifeline. It was announced this week by the government that they would be offering a 15% business rates discounts to pubs and also to music venues, whilst also freezing their rates in real terms for 2 years. Now, I have a lot of thoughts about this. So when it comes to things like, oh, well, we're seeing an increase in our business rates because a tax relief is ending, well, I don't really have too much sympathy because that was specifically there for the pandemic, and we can't just have a new normal where you have a really huge discounted rate that nobody else gets, and then you lose that. When it comes to re-evaluations in terms of business rates, this just happens over time. Business rates are set by the rental value or the perceived rental value of the property, and that's just something that will happen. It's not really the government's fault if that's the case. But on the other hand, I look at this and I go, well, pubs are an important community asset. Pubs are something that have been part of areas and local businesses that everyone frequents. It's part of the local community spirit. It's such a big part of our culture that is it not important that even if these things are being affected to them outside of both them and the government's control, that they should at least be given some amount of relief because of that special place that they hold in British life. But then again, on the other hand, this looks a lot to me like what happened with the U-turn on agricultural property relief reforms, where regardless of the efficacy of what's being done, regardless of whether or not the policy in the first place was justifiable or not, by allowing one singular special interest group to be able to get their way on a certain policy, you then open up the door for every other special interest group to say, well, what about me? Right? This current one is, again, only a discount on business rates for pubs and for music venues. What about other hospitality venues? What about restaurants and cafes? Should they not also get this extra freezing of business rates and a 15% discount that is applying for pubs and music venues? Just because pubs have this kind of cultural significance, does that make those business owners somehow more important when it comes to giving them these discounts than everybody else? And it will just kind of lead to this position where the government will continue to U-turn and U-turn and U-turn because policies are perceived to be unpopular rather than sticking to their guns, whether they think that it's justified or not. And then again, do we not want a government that U-turns? Is it not a good thing that a government looks at what the public is saying and says, well, we tried something, but now I've realized the public doesn't like it, so we're going to rein that in? Or is that a more kind of fundamental problem that the government's just continually doing things that the public hates because they just don't understand what the public want and what businesses in this country will value? And that's a big problem for them if they can't get it right first time. Dahlia, what do you make of all of this? Do you think we should be keeping discounts? Do you think we should be reforming business rates in a larger way? And what do you think about the government's continuing U-turning here? Do you think it's something that is to be commended, or is it something that is just a damning indictment on the failure of them to get it right the first time?
Well, I think for a Labour Party that seems to be so obsessed with optics and comms above literally anything else. It's funny how they seem to manage to repeatedly get the optics and comms wrong, because as you pointed out, Helena, when it comes to, you know, things that people tangibly experience in their everyday lives and things that are really meaningful to people, pubs, as one of the very few places where people still gather and socialize, where it's a lifeline for so many people. You have to be very, very careful when it comes to the policies around pubs, because it is such a tangibly important part of people's everyday life in a similar way to, for example, the NHS is. And I think that you raise a lot of really interesting questions. I think that what this is a fundamentally bigger symptom of, it actually goes wider than business rates and things like this. And I think it speaks to the overall sense that kind of local autonomy, local culture, local businesses are steamrolled by these mega muck corporate chains. And we see this in pubs where, the kind of locally owned pub is being sort of steamrolled by these big pub chains, which sort of have this very which take all the charm essentially and the local benefits of a pub out. But we also see it, for example, in with cafes, which is probably more my wheelhouse. But I read a paper recently about how, Gales, which is the corporate coffee chain, actually wait until independent cafes demonstrate, do all that hard graft and all of that work where someone pours it, to set up a cafe. It's like you have to pour in so much of your time and your creativity and your life, and you spend all that work demonstrating that there is local business there are local customers there, and Gales basically monitors the opening and the success of independent cafes, and then that's how it uses that data to decide where their next location is going to be. And then they set up a shop, a couple of doors down from that local independent business that has its own charm, its own identity, its own niche, and is successful on its own terms, and basically price them out of existence, which they are able to do because they are able to offset their costs by the fact that they own hundreds and hundreds of stores all across the country. And I think it's that kind of corporatization and feeling of loss that really people feel the most strongly about. And that comes down to questions that are much bigger than individual business rates, or like whether or not we maintain the tax relief from COVID for pubs, and actually speaks to this question of urban planning and how do we decide who gets to shape our local area? How do we decide who gets to use the land and in what ways? Do we allow huge investment companies and, the BlackRocks of the world to basically buy up leaseholds and steamroll any local business out of existence? Or do we have protections for local businesses that understand the importance of local businesses to community spirit and to kind of people's sense of place? And we lose out on some of the benefits of this corporatization as a result of that. Those benefits don't really come to us as ordinary people, but they go to the fact that these big companies are able to make a huge amount of money from us without kind of, and that is often hand in hand with state benefits as well.
That's so bang on, as well as the fact that one of the biggest kind of corporate owners that is kind of to blame for where our small businesses are at, what our high streets look like, is big corporate landlords, right? Like, the thing that's the basis for the change in the rateable values is, well, how much would the market rate be for rent in these areas? I'm like, well, yeah, the people who make all the money in rent, right, are people who charge small businesses rent to access for these properties, these giant corporate landlords, again, who don't do anything. They don't produce anything. They don't actually do anything productive. All they do is just own huge swathes of corporate and storefront real estate in this country, and then charge the hardworking small business owners of this country through the nose to be able to have access to it.